There is a paradox that some things money cannot buy, but to keep those things close, you need money. A lot of it. That is exactly when your son lies in a hospital bed with time running out, and you will sell anything, even yourself. Jason Miller thought he had tasted every flavor of desperation, until the strange woman walked into his son's hospital room at 2 a.m. with an offer he could not refuse. "I will save your boy," she said, her voice cold as the fluorescent lights humming overhead. "But in return, you give me a child." The contract lay between them on the table, 47 pages of legal terms turning a human life into negotiable clauses. Outside, the heart monitor beeped in steady rhythm, counting down the hours Ethan had left. Catherine Hayes did not blink when she slid the pen across the table. She had learned long ago that everything has a price, even miracles. Perhaps this was not the way to save a dying child. But when you stand at the edge between life and death, when the smell of disinfectant fills your lungs, and the only sound is your son's labored breathing, can you still afford the luxury of thinking about morality? The fluorescent lights in St. Mary's Hospital never sleep. They hum through the night, casting their pale glow over rooms where families wait for miracles or prepare for goodbyes. Jason Miller had spent 43 nights in room 314, sitting in a vinyl chair that squeaked every time he shifted his weight. His son Ethan lay in the bed, 8 years old, with a heart that was giving up. The doctors had given them a timeline, 2 weeks, maybe less. The surgery could save him, but the cost was $500,000, and Jason's insurance would cover only a fraction of that amount. Jason worked as an electrician, pulling wires through walls and fixing circuits in homes he could never afford to own. He had already sold his truck, borrowed from every friend who would still answer his calls, and maxed out 3 credit cards. The gap between what he had and what he needed was a chasm he could not cross. On his lap sat a pamphlet from Fertility Hope Clinic. $3,000 per donation, they said. He had filled out the paperwork that afternoon, his hand shaking as he wrote his name. It was not enough, not even close, but it was something. It was all he had left to sell. Ethan stirred in his sleep, and Jason reached over to adjust the blanket that had slipped down. The boy's chest rose and fell in shallow movements, each breath a small victory against the failing muscle inside. Jason had not slept more than 2 hours at a time in weeks. Every sound from the monitors made his heart jump. Every footstep in the hallway could be a doctor coming with news he was not ready to hear. He whispered to his son, words he had repeated so many times, they felt like a prayer. "I'm sorry, buddy. Dad's not strong enough." Ethan's eyes flickered open, and for a moment, the boy seemed older than his years. "It's okay, Dad. Don't be sad." Those words broke something inside Jason that had already been cracked and held together with hope that was running out. The door opened just after 2 a.m. Jason looked up, expecting a nurse, but instead saw a woman he had never met. She wore a dark coat over expensive clothes, her hair pulled back in a way that spoke of boardrooms and power lunches. She did not smile. She did not introduce herself. She simply walked to the foot of Ethan's bed and looked at the sleeping child for a long moment. Jason stood up, ready to ask who she was and what she wanted, but before he could speak, she turned to him. "I heard your conversation at the clinic today," she said. Her voice was measured, controlled, the kind of voice that gave orders and expected them to be followed. "Your son needs $500,000. I need something too." Jason's mind raced. He had been at the clinic that morning, practically begging the receptionist to let him donate early, to advance him the payment so he could start putting together the pieces of a plan that might save Ethan. This woman must have overheard. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough from lack of sleep and too much coffee. She did not answer the question directly. Instead, she stepped closer, and he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive, that did not belong in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and fear. "My name is Catherine Hayes," she said. "I run a technology company. I have more money than I will ever need. But there is something I cannot buy. I want a child, but I don't want a husband. I don't want a relationship. I want to know exactly who the father is, and I want complete control." She paused, letting her words settle in the air between them. "I will pay for your son's surgery. All of it, plus $200,000 more. In exchange, you help me get pregnant, and then you disappear from our lives. Forever." Jason felt the room tilt. This could not be real. People did not walk into hospitals at 2 a.m. and offer deals like this. He looked at Ethan, at the monitors tracking his weakening heart, at the IV drip keeping him hydrated because he was too tired to drink on his own. "You're serious," he said, though it was not really a question. Catherine reached into her coat and pulled out a business card. "I have a lawyer who will draw up the contract. You have 24 hours to decide. After that, this offer expires." She placed the card on the table next to the pamphlet about sperm donation, and the contrast was almost funny. One path offered $3,000 and anonymity. The other offered salvation and a price he could not calculate. "Why me?" Jason asked. Catherine looked at him with eyes that gave nothing away. "Because you are desperate enough to say yes, and decent enough that I believe you will honor the agreement. Because I saw you with your son, and I know what kind of father you are. That is what I want for my child." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. 24 hours, Mr. Miller. Think carefully." And then she was gone, leaving only the faint trace of her perfume and a business card that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Jason did not sleep that night. He sat with the card in his hand, turning it over and over, reading the embossed letters. Hayes Technology. CEO and founder. He looked it up on his phone and found articles about Catherine Hayes, the self-made billionaire who had built her empire from a single software patent. She was 38, unmarried, and known for being ruthless in business. There were no scandals, no public relationships, just a woman who had climbed to the top and stayed there. The next morning, Dr. Bennett came by during rounds. She was a kind woman who had been honest with Jason from the beginning. "We need to schedule the surgery soon," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Ethan has maybe 10 days. After that, his heart will not be strong enough to handle the operation." Jason nodded, unable to form words. 10 days. He had 10 days to find a miracle or watch his son die. That afternoon, he called the number on the card. A receptionist answered, professional and efficient, and put him through to Catherine Hayes without hesitation. "I need to know this is real," Jason said when she picked up. "I need to know you will actually do this." There was a pause, and then Catherine's voice came through. Clear and certain. "I do not make offers I cannot keep, Mr. Miller. My lawyer will contact you this afternoon. If you agree, the funds for your son's surgery will be transferred immediately." Jason closed his eyes. He thought about Ethan's laugh, the way the boy used to run through their small apartment before he got sick, the dreams he had of becoming a firefighter or an astronaut or whatever 8-year-olds dream about when the world still feels full of possibilities. "I agree," Jason said, and felt something inside him break and reform into a shape he did not recognize. The contract arrived 3 hours later. Robert Kane, attorney at law, met Jason in the hospital cafeteria with a briefcase and an expression that suggested he had seen stranger things than this, but not by much. 47 pages of legal language that boiled down to a few simple points. Catherine Hayes would pay $700,000, $500,000 for the surgery, and $200,000 for Jason's cooperation. Jason would make himself available until Catherine became pregnant. Once the child was born, Jason would have no legal rights, no contact, no claim to paternity. There would be complete confidentiality. If Jason violated any term, he would owe back every penny plus damages. "This is unusual," Robert said, which seemed like the understatement of the year. "But it is legal. Do you understand what you are agreeing to?" Jason understood. He was agreeing to create a life and walk away from it. He was agreeing to be a biological father, but nothing more. He was agreeing to save one child by giving another to a woman he did not know. He signed on the last page, his signature shaky but legible. The money transferred that evening. Dr. Bennett called him into her office, confused and relieved. "I do not know what happened," she said, "but the hospital just received payment in full for Ethan's surgery. We can schedule it for tomorrow morning." Jason felt tears on his face and did not bother to wipe them away. Tomorrow morning, his son would have a chance. That was all that mattered. That night, he sat by Ethan's bed and told him the good news. The boy smiled, a real smile that Jason had not seen in weeks. "You did it, Dad," Ethan said. Jason nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He had done it, but the cost was something he would carry for the rest of his life. The surgery took 11 hours. Jason paced the waiting room, drinking bad coffee and watching the clock. Catherine Hayes appeared once, standing at a distance, not approaching, but present. When the surgeon finally emerged and said the words Jason had been praying to hear, "It went well. He's going to be okay." Jason collapsed into a chair and sobbed. Catherine watched from across the room, her expression unreadable, then left without a word. 3 days later, when Ethan was stable and sleeping peacefully, Jason received a text from an unknown number. "Tomorrow, 8 p.m., the address below." It was time to uphold his end of the bargain. The arrangement was clinical. Catherine had rented a small apartment, neutral and impersonal, where they would meet. There was no romance, no pretense of anything beyond the transaction they had agreed to. The first time was awkward and mechanical. Two strangers bound by a contract and nothing else. But over the weeks that followed, something shifted. Catherine would sometimes stay after, sitting on the couch and asking about Ethan. Jason would tell her stories about his son, about the Lego sets they built together, about how Ethan wanted to be a firefighter because he liked the trucks. Catherine listened in a way that felt genuine, and sometimes Jason caught a glimpse of something softer beneath her polished exterior. He learned small things about her, too. She took her coffee black. She worked until midnight most nights. She had built her company from scratch after her father told her she would never amount to anything in a man's world. She did not talk about why she wanted a child or why she wanted to do it alone, but Jason could see the loneliness that lived behind her eyes. It was the same loneliness he felt every night when he went home to an empty apartment, the same hollow ache of living without someone to share the weight of the world. One evening, 2 months into the arrangement, Catherine arrived late. She had been drinking, Jason could tell, though she was not drunk. She sat down heavily on the couch and stared at the ceiling. "I was pregnant once," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 7 years ago. I was married then. I worked too much. I was driving home at 3 a.m. after closing a deal, and I fell asleep at the wheel. I lost the baby. My husband left me a month later. He said I wasn't fit to be a mother because all I cared about was work." Jason sat beside her, unsure what to say. "He was wrong," he finally offered. Catherine laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Was he? I'm doing this because I don't trust myself to let anyone close enough to hurt me again. I want a child, but I want to control every part of it. What does that say about me?" Jason reached over and took her hand. It was the first time they had touched outside of their arrangement. "It says you are scared. We are all scared of something." Catherine looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment, he thought she might cry. But she did not. She pulled her hand away and stood up. "Thank you for tonight," she said, formal again, the wall back in place. "I should go." In the 3rd month, Catherine called him. "I am pregnant," she said, her voice flat and controlled. Jason felt a surge of emotion he could not name. Relief that the arrangement was over. Sadness that he would never see her again. Something else. Something he did not want to examine too closely. "Congratulations," he said. There was a long pause. "The contract is fulfilled," Catherine said. "Please do not contact me again." The line went dead. Jason stood in his kitchen, staring at his phone, feeling like something important had just ended, and he had not been ready for it. Ethan was home now, recovering beautifully, his color back and his energy returning. He asked about Catherine sometimes. "Is Miss Hayes your girlfriend, Dad?" Jason had laughed and said no, just a friend. But now she was not even that. She was someone who had saved his son and asked for something in return. And now, she was gone. The weeks turned into months. Jason tried to focus on Ethan, on getting back to work, on rebuilding the life that had been shattered by medical bills and fear. But he could not stop thinking about Catherine. He wondered how she was feeling, if the pregnancy was going well, if she was scared or happy, or still just determinedly alone. He saw a news article online. Tech CEO Catherine Hayes announces pregnancy, plans to raise child as single mother. The article quoted her saying she had used an anonymous donor and was excited to embark on this journey independently. Anonymous donor. The word stung more than Jason expected. He wanted to reach out, to ask if she was okay, but the contract was clear. No contact. He had signed away any right to be part of this. He tried to respect that, but it was harder than he thought it would be. Then Ethan asked the question Jason had been dreading. They were eating dinner. Spaghetti that Jason had burned slightly, but Ethan ate anyway because he was 8 and not picky. "Dad," Ethan said, twirling his fork, "the baby that Miss Hayes is having, is that my brother or sister?" Jason froze. He had never told Ethan the details, had never explained the arrangement. But his son was perceptive, had always been able to read between the lines. "What makes you think that?" Jason asked carefully. Ethan shrugged. "You looked at her the same way you look at me, like she was important. And she paid for my surgery, right? You told me a friend helped, but I know we do not have friends with that kind of money. It was her." Jason put down his fork. He could lie, but he had never lied to his son before. "Yes," he said quietly. "The baby is your brother or sister. But it is complicated, buddy. Miss Hayes wanted to have a baby on her own, and I helped her. But I am not going to be part of that baby's life." Ethan frowned, thinking this over with the seriousness of a child trying to understand adult problems. "Why not?" he asked. "Does not the baby need a dad?" The question hit Jason like a punch. "Sometimes things are complicated," Jason said, hating how inadequate that sounded. Ethan looked at him with those clear, honest eyes. "When I was sick, you never left me alone. Not once. Why would we leave Miss Hayes alone now?" That night, Jason could not sleep. He thought about Ethan's question, about the baby growing inside Catherine, about the contract he had signed. He thought about the loneliness he had seen in Catherine's eyes, the same loneliness he felt every night. He picked up his phone a dozen times, typed out messages he never sent. "Are you okay? Do you need anything? I'm thinking about you." All of them felt inadequate or invasive, or like a violation of the agreement they had made. So he did nothing, and the silence stretched on. 3 more months passed. Jason heard through a mutual acquaintance, Robert Kane, the lawyer, who ran into Jason at a coffee shop and seemed to have a conscience about the whole arrangement, that Catherine was struggling. The pregnancy was difficult. She was working too much, not taking care of herself, pushing through like she pushed through everything else in her life. "She will not listen to anyone," Robert said, stirring his coffee absently. "She is convinced she has to do this alone, that asking for help is weakness." Jason thanked him for the information and left, his mind racing. That night, he wrote a letter, not a text or an email, but an actual letter on paper, the way people used to communicate when words felt too important for pixels. "Catherine," he wrote, "I know I am not supposed to contact you, and I will respect whatever you decide. But I want you to know that if you ever need anything, I am here. Not because of the contract or out of obligation, but because I want to be. You saved my son. You gave me a second chance at being a father. If you need someone, even just to bring you groceries or listen when you are scared, I am here. No strings, no expectations. Just a friend, if you will let me be one." He put the letter in an envelope, addressed it to her office, and mailed it before he could change his mind. He did not expect a response, and for 2 weeks, he did not get one. Then, on a Tuesday night, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered, and Catherine's voice came through, tight with pain. "Jason, I need help." He did not ask questions. He grabbed his keys and was out the door, telling Ethan to stay with their neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. Catherine had given him an address, not her office or the apartment where they had met, but her home. A penthouse in the city that probably cost more than Jason would make in 3 lifetimes. When he got there, the doorman let him up immediately, like Catherine had already called down. He found her in the living room, bent over in pain, her face pale and her hands shaking. "The baby," she gasped. "Something is wrong." Jason called 911, then knelt beside her, holding her hand and telling her to breathe. The ambulance arrived within minutes, and Jason rode with her to the hospital, holding her hand the entire way. At the emergency room, the doctors rushed her into triage, and Jason was left in the waiting room, his heart pounding. An hour later, a doctor came out, and Jason stood up so fast he knocked over a chair. "She has preeclampsia," the doctor said. "It is serious, but we have her stabilized. However, continuing the pregnancy could be life-threatening. We are recommending she consider delivery, even though she is only at 34 weeks. Jason felt the floor drop out from under him. "Can I see her?" The doctor nodded. "She is asking for you." Catherine looked small in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors and IVs. When she saw Jason, tears spilled down her face, the first time he had ever seen her cry. "I am so scared," she whispered. Jason pulled a chair close and took her hand. "You are going to be okay. We are going to get through this." Catherine shook her head. "I cannot do this alone. I thought I could, but I cannot. I am so tired of being alone." Jason felt his own eyes burning. "You are not alone. I am here. I am not going anywhere." At that moment, the door opened, and Ethan walked in. Jason turned, surprised. Mrs. Patterson stood behind the boy, looking apologetic. "He insisted," she said. "I could not stop him." Ethan walked right up to Catherine's bed, his face serious. "Miss Hayes," he said, "the baby in your belly is my brother or sister, right?" Catherine looked at Jason, then back at Ethan. "Yes," she said softly. Ethan nodded, like that settled something important. "Then we should not leave you alone. When I was sick, Dad stayed with me every single day." Family does not leave each other alone. Catherine let out a sob, and Ethan climbed onto the bed, careful of the wires, and hugged her. "It is okay to be scared," he said. "Dad told me that, but you do not have to be scared by yourself." The decision was made that night. Catherine would deliver the baby early by emergency C-section. The risks were real, But continuing the pregnancy was worse. Jason stayed through it all, pacing the waiting room with Ethan beside him, both of them too nervous to sit still. When the doctor finally came out, Jason stood up, holding his breath. "You have a daughter," the doctor said with a smile. "She is small, only 5 pounds, but she is breathing on her own and doing well. Catherine is stable and asking for you." Jason felt the relief wash over him so intensely, he had to sit down. Ethan grabbed his hand. "We have a sister, Dad." Jason looked at his son, this brave, beautiful boy who had taught him more about love and courage than he ever expected to learn. "Yeah, buddy, we do." Catherine was exhausted, but awake when Jason entered her room. The baby was in her arms, wrapped in a pink blanket, impossibly tiny and perfect. Catherine looked up at Jason, and the walls she had built around herself were gone. "I'm sorry," she said. "I thought I could do this without you. I thought needing someone made me weak." Jason sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the baby, at this tiny life that was half him and half Catherine. "Needing someone does not make you weak," he said. "It makes you human." Catherine reached out and took his hand. "I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to be a mother, or let someone in, or trust that you will not leave." Jason squeezed her hand gently. "Neither do I. But we will figure it out together." The weeks that followed were chaotic and messy, and nothing like Jason had imagined. Catherine named the baby Lily, and she came home after 10 days in the NICU, tiny but healthy. Jason took time off work, and Catherine, for the first time in her life, delegated her responsibilities at the company. They figured out feeding schedules and diaper changes, and how to function on 2 hours of sleep. Ethan was an amazing big brother, singing Lily to sleep with the same lullabies Jason had sung to him. There were hard moments. Catherine struggled with postpartum anxiety, convinced she was failing at everything. Jason felt overwhelmed. Trying to balance 2 kids and a woman he was falling for, but did not know if he had the right to love. They fought sometimes, exhausted and raw, about small things that felt big in the moment. But they kept showing up for each other, day after day, learning that love was not about grand gestures, but about the small, unglamorous work of being present. Catherine's mother, Margaret, flew in from Boston when Lily was 6 weeks old. The 2 women had not spoken in 5 years, estranged over Catherine's single-minded focus on her career. But when Margaret walked into Catherine's apartment and saw Jason feeding Lily while Catherine napped on the couch, saw Ethan doing his homework at the kitchen table, something in the older woman's face softened. "This is what you needed," Margaret said quietly to Catherine later, "not to do everything alone. To let people love you." Catherine cried in her mother's arms, and the rift between them began to heal. Jason watched from the doorway, holding Lily, and thought about how strange and unexpected this life had become. He had walked into a hospital room months ago, broken and desperate, and now he had a family that looked nothing like he had planned, but felt more right than anything he had ever known. 6 months later, Jason found himself back in the same hospital, but this time for Lily's checkup. She was thriving, hitting all her milestones, her laugh filling rooms with joy. Ethan played with her in the waiting room, making funny faces that sent her into giggles. Catherine sat beside Jason, their hands intertwined, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, Jason felt at peace. "I've been thinking," Catherine said, her voice quiet enough that only he could hear, "about the contract, about what we agreed to." Jason's stomach tightened. "Yeah?" Catherine turned to look at him. "I want to tear it up. I do not want you here because of an agreement. I want you here because you choose to be. Because we are choosing this, together." Jason felt the knot in his chest loosen. "I have been choosing this for months now, not because of the contract, Because I cannot imagine my life without you and Lily in it." Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to think I could buy anything, control everything. I thought needing people was a weakness. But you taught me that the things that matter most cannot be bought or controlled. They can only be given freely." Jason kissed the top of her head. "You saved my son. I thought I had sold my soul to do it. Turns out I found a family instead." They decided to get married quietly, just the four of them and Margaret, in the same hospital chapel where Jason had spent so many nights praying for Ethan's survival. It felt fitting somehow to start this new chapter in the place where everything had changed. Ethan was the ring bearer, taking his job very seriously. Lily, now 8 months old, gurgled happily in Margaret's arms. When the chaplain asked if they took each other in sickness and in health, in wealth and in poverty, Jason thought about the journey that had brought them here, the desperation, the impossible choice, the contract that had tried to reduce love to legal terms. And he thought about how none of it had gone according to plan, but somehow it had led them to this moment. Life settled into a new rhythm. Catherine scaled back at work, something she never thought she would do, and discovered that the company ran just fine without her constant supervision. Jason went back to being an electrician, but now he came home to a house full of noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of a blended family. They fought sometimes because real love is messy and complicated. They struggled with balancing careers and parenting and the weight of their own insecurities. But they kept choosing each other, day after day, in small moments and big ones. Ethan started 4th grade and announced he wanted to be a doctor, inspired by Dr. Bennett, who had saved his life. Lily took her first steps on a random Tuesday afternoon, and all 4 of them cheered like she had won an Olympic medal. Catherine learned to let her guard down, to ask for help, to believe that being vulnerable was not the same as being weak. Jason learned that he was enough, that his worth was not measured by his bank account or his ability to provide, but by his capacity to show up and love fiercely. One night, when both kids were finally asleep, Jason and Catherine sat on their apartment balcony, looking out at the city lights. Catherine was quiet for a long time, then spoke. "Do you ever regret it? The way all this started?" Jason considered the question. "I regret that I was in a position where I had to make that choice. I regret that the world works in a way where healthcare costs $500,000 and desperation is currency. But do I regret what came from it? No, not for a second." Catherine leaned against him. "I thought I wanted a child, so I could control every aspect of their life. So I would never be hurt again. But Lily did not save me. You did. You and Ethan. You showed me that love is not about control. It is about trust." Jason wrapped his arm around her. "We were both broken when we met. I think we healed each other." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the city below. Inside, they could hear Ethan's soft snoring from his room and Lily's gentle breathing over the baby monitor. It was not perfect. Their apartment was too small, and money was still tight sometimes. Catherine still worked too much, and Jason still worried about being enough. But they had each other, and they had built something real from the ashes of desperation and loneliness. "You know what the irony is?" Jason said after a while. "I thought I was selling myself to save Ethan, like I was making a deal with the devil. But what I actually did was give life, not just to Lily, but to all of us. We were all dying in different ways before we found each other." Catherine nodded. "I was so afraid of needing anyone. I thought independence meant isolation. I was wrong." She paused, then added, "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I pushed you away." Jason kissed her temple. "Thank you for letting me in, for taking the risk." The story could end there, with the sunset and the happy family. But real life is not that neat. There were more challenges ahead. Catherine's company faced a hostile takeover attempt, and she had to fight to keep what she had built. Ethan had a health scare that turned out to be nothing but reminded them all how fragile life could be. Lily developed a stubborn streak that came from both her parents, and parenting a toddler tested their patience in ways they hadn't anticipated. But they faced it all together, as a unit, as a family that had been forged in the fires of impossible choices and had come out stronger for it. They learned that happily ever after is not a destination, but a daily practice of showing up, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. Years later, when Ethan was in high school and Lily was starting kindergarten, Jason would sometimes think back to that night in the hospital when Catherine had walked into his life with an offer that sounded like madness. He would think about the 47-page contract that had tried to define something that couldn't be contained in legal language. He would think about how close he had come to losing everything, and how, in trying to save one life, he had been given 3 more. Catherine would catch him lost in thought sometimes and ask what he was thinking about. "Just how we got here," he would say. And she would smile, that guarded smile that had slowly opened up over the years into something warm and genuine. "The long way around," she would say. "But we made it." The truth was, there were things money could not buy. Love, trust, the sound of your children laughing together, the warmth of coming home to people who chose you every day. But there was also a paradox Catherine and Jason both understood now. Sometimes you needed money to keep the people you loved alive. Sometimes the world forced impossible choices, and you did what you had to do to survive. The system was broken, and they had both been casualties of it in different ways. But they had found each other in that brokenness, and they had built something beautiful from the shards. That was not a justification for how things were. It was just the truth of how they had survived and found their way to love. And in the end, that was enough. Not perfect, not simple, but enough. They were enough for each other, and that was the only currency that truly mattered.